Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm mildly autistic, which mainly means I have trouble reading subtle emotions in others. When someone's feelings aren't obvious, I struggle to pick up on body language cues that most people understand. To make up for this, I try to stay calm, friendly, and collected in all my interactions. It works well most of the time. Back in the late 90s, I was working at one of the largest supermarkets in my country. I had started with a Saturday job, but after turning 18, I signed on for a full-time summer contract. The pay was decent and the work wasn't too demanding. My main responsibility was managing the separate liquor shop. I stocked shelves, rang up customers, and advised people on their purchases. I also did shifts, stocking in the main store, and worked the registers. I enjoyed working in the liquor department. It was small, I knew the regulars, and I felt respected because I had good knowledge about the products we sold. I'm not an alcoholic. I enjoy the occasional beer or whiskey on weekends, rarely more than one. But over my 4 years working there, I had chances to taste many different liquors through returned bottles or distributor demonstrations. This knowledge made me good at my job. I'm quite tall, 198 centimeters or 6'4", and a bit overweight due to medication I was on at the time. Not extremely heavy, but I had a bit of a man bump that was mostly noticeable when sitting down. With my height, it wasn't very obvious, especially when wearing my shop overcoat. The trouble started when our meat department hired a new girl. In the beginning, she seemed nice enough, but my calm demeanor bothered her when I didn't respond to her stories with the emotion she expected. Years later, I heard she might have had a crush on me, but since I already had a girlfriend, I wasn't receptive to her attempts at getting my attention. One day, I was heading to the break room for my break. I had unbuttoned my shop overcoat, a sign in my country that someone is on break, and was making the 5-minute walk to the break room, stopping to chat with colleagues along the way. When I reached the meat department, she was already cleaning the meat slicers. As soon as I rounded the corner, she tried to start a conversation. I simply said hello as usual, and she tried to chat me up. I told her that I was going on my break and needed some coffee. That's when she called me a fatso as I went to get my coffee. I'm not truly fat, just somewhere in between slender and heavy at 6'4" and 180 pounds. On my way back from break, I got similar insults, and from that day forward, she gradually increased her comments. I have thick skin and don't really care what most people think of me. Only the opinions of people who matter to me count. She didn't fall into that category. Her insults evolved from fat jokes, which didn't bother me, to questioning my manliness. In her mind, as a man, I should have been attracted to a small, blonde, blue-eyed girl like her. In her jokes, she portrayed herself as the perfect little girl and me as the big, supposedly impotent brute. Eventually, she started using homophobic slurs because I didn't drool over her physique. Physically, she wasn't bad-looking. Some might even call her pretty, until she opened her mouth. She cursed constantly and had terrible manners. When the name-calling didn't work, she tried a new approach. She began syncing her breaks with mine, going as far as calling my department head to find out when I would be on break. She would walk up to me and pinch me so I'd spill coffee or soda all over myself. I tried to ignore her, but that only made things worse. I knew if I snapped and hit her, my job would be at risk. In those days, it would be her word against mine, and who would believe a big 6'4" guy over a tiny 5'4" blonde girl? The odds weren't in my favor. I needed a plan to make this stop. My girlfriend suggested I report her, which made sense, but I needed proof. Our break room and the hallway to it didn't have cameras. The warehouse did have cameras though, and I realized I could take my breaks there. I knew if I got my coffee from the delivery driver's machine and ate my sandwich sitting on the loading dock, I'd be in view of at least 2 or 3 cameras. She wouldn't dare pull her stunts there, right? Wrong. By the end of the week, I had 3 incidents caught on camera. Since my department had the safe with the camera recording equipment, I only needed my department head's cooperation to make my move. My department head knew about my autism and we had a good working relationship. It took just 5 minutes to convince her to save the tapes from those days and another 10 minutes to isolate and copy the incidents onto a separate VHS tape. She couldn't believe what she saw and apologized for not noticing sooner. We called the harasser to my department head's office. My department head asked if what I was saying was true. She denied everything and turned the accusations around on me. She claimed that I was the one who constantly touched her and that I deliberately synchronized my brakes with hers so I could grope her. She said she was merely responding to my actions. My department head played the compilation video showing clearly that I arrived first, then her leaving, then me, proving I couldn't have instigated anything. She went pale, then red, then pale again, looking around frantically for an escape. I was standing by the door to prevent her from fleeing, the same procedure we used with shoplifters. She started crying and claimed the videos were taken out of context. When my department head asked what I thought should be done, I said I wanted to send the tape with my complaint to the manager since she wasn't going to admit to anything. The harasser changed her demeanor, dropping the tears completely. She smugly declared that no one would believe me because she was a sweet girl who never did anything wrong, and that I would be blamed simply because I was a man. My department head dismissed me, saying she would talk with the young woman privately. As I closed the door, I heard my department head questioning her about what sick game she was playing, what kind of fool she took her for, and what her problem was with me. The next day, I was called to the manager's office for a statement. I explained how she had made my workplace hell for 3 months to the point where I couldn't even take breaks in the break room anymore. I described being ambushed, groped, verbally assaulted, and sexually harassed. I told him I would have quit if nothing was done. The manager was stunned by the video and called the regional manager. After a short phone call, I was told to wait in the break room. For the first time in over a month, I could enjoy a coffee in peace. Soon after, the manager called her department head and my department head to his office, then called her in. I heard muffled screams, shouting, and crying as she maintained her innocence. Less than 10 minutes later, I heard a door slam so hard that the blinds between the break room and the manager's office fell down. I saw 3 shocked managers staring at the door, which was barely hanging by its bottom hinge, the top hinge completely off. The store manager told me she had been fired for sexual harassment. They were also reporting her to the police and suing for the damage she caused to the office. She had thrown a chair at the TV and VCR, destroying them before storming out. The company treated me well, and I stayed there for another 3 to 4 years before finding work in my actual field of study. It was a good job that let me afford living and studying at the same time. Since my town isn't very big, I've run into her once since then. Even after more than 20 years, she still blames me for getting her fired. I have no regrets. I'm staring at my phone, waiting for the moment when his house will go dark. Let me explain how I got here. For 10 years, I was married to a man who made my life hell. 10 years of walking on eggshells, covering bruises, making excuses to friends and family. 10 years of domestic violence that I normalized because I thought it was what I deserved or what my kids needed. I was wrong. Despite everything, I always went all out for his birthday, which fell during Valentine's Day week. I planned elaborate celebrations, dinners, gifts, weekend getaways, all while nursing hidden injuries or emotional wounds. I'd smile through it all because that's what I thought I had to do. When I finally gathered the courage to leave, I took our kids and ran. I left behind nearly everything: furniture, mementos, even the house we'd shared. It wasn't about the stuff, it was about freedom. I needed to be completely disconnected from him to feel safe again. Starting over as a single mother wasn't easy. Between finding a new place to live, getting the kids settled in new schools, working extra hours to make ends meet, and going to therapy to process the trauma, I was overwhelmed. Some administrative details fell through the cracks. A few weeks ago, my oldest son was home from college and visited his father for an hour. When he returned, he mentioned something that caught my attention. He told me he had seen mail at his dad's house with my name on it, and it looked like an electric bill. I was shocked and said that couldn't be right since we'd been separated for almost 2 years. My son told me he definitely saw my name on it, right there on the counter. This bothered me enough to do some digging. I ran my credit report and found that the electric service at my former home was still in my name, along with a few other accounts that should have been transferred to him after I left. He was supposed to have updated everything into his name. That was our agreement, but doing so would have cost him money, so he didn't. I called the electric company. I asked the customer service representative why an account for a property I no longer lived in was still in my name. The representative checked their records and told me that I was still the account holder for service at my ex's address, and there had been no request to change or terminate service. I told them I hadn't lived there in almost 2 years and was divorced from the person currently living there. The representative told me my options. They said I could either notify the current resident and schedule a termination, which would give him time to come to their office with a deposit and paperwork to start an account in his name, or I could terminate the account without notification. They even mentioned that if I chose the second option, this week would be the best time in the billing cycle to do it. I thought about it for a while. He lives alone, no pets or dependents who would be harmed by a night without power. It would be inconvenient for him. He'd be confused when everything suddenly went dark. Then he'd have to figure out what happened, be told the news, get angry, and finally have to come up with a deposit to get his power turned back on. All of this on his birthday. I made my decision. I told the representative that I'd like to terminate service that day. They said they could schedule it for close of business and that I wouldn't need to be present since I was the account holder. When I asked about any remaining deposit on the account, they confirmed it would be returned to me. So here I am now watching the clock, knowing that Operation Lights Out Jerk is about to happen. I imagine him sitting in his house, maybe opening a birthday beer, when suddenly, darkness, confusion followed by the slow realization that something is wrong with the power. I picture him calling the electric company tomorrow morning, still assuming it's a temporary outage, only to find that the account has been terminated because it was never in his name to begin with. Then comes the anger, followed by the hassle of having to go down to the office, pay a deposit, and start a new account. Will he realize this was my doing? Probably. Do I care? Not anymore. If there is any deposit returned to me, I won't keep a penny. I'll be donating it all to the Women's Crisis Center a few towns away from where I live now. The same place that helped me get back on my feet when I had nothing. I know this might seem petty to some, but after years of abuse and manipulation, this small act of reclaiming my power feels satisfying. He took so much from me, my sense of safety, my self-worth, years of my life, but tonight I'm taking something from him, the convenience of electricity and the comfort of a warm birthday evening. And here, in my new home, with electricity I pay for in my own name, I'm finally living the life I never thought possible. When we bought our house backing up to the public park, I knew there would be some inconveniences, traffic during games, noise, maybe some litter. What I didn't expect was a weeks-long battle with the most entitled park visitor ever. Our house sits 4 doors down from the park entrance, which is just a sidewalk cutting between 2 houses. There's no parking lot, so visitors park on the street. Right in front of our house stands a fire hydrant, bright yellow, painted curb, and an orange flag sticking out of the top. You'd have to be blind to miss it. Most park goers are respectful. They see the hydrant and find another spot. During busy game days, parking gets tight, but that's just life near a park. Everything was fine until 3 weeks ago when club baseball season started. Baseball parents tend to be more observant than other sports parents. They leave a gap around the hydrant, except for one guy with an electric truck who thought traffic laws didn't apply to him. Week 1, the encounter. I was heading out to walk my dog when I noticed an electric truck trying to squeeze into the space in front of the hydrant. My dog and I waited while the driver parked, thinking he might realize his mistake. When he finished parking, I went up to him. I pointed out that he was blocking a fire hydrant. The man looked at the hydrant, then back at me. He told me to mind my own business. When I said this was my house and his parking made a safety hazard, He cursed at me and told me to go away. He walked off toward the baseball field, leaving me standing there with my dog, shocked by his answer. 2. The ticket. The next Saturday, my dog and I were coming back from our walk when we saw the same truck parked in front of the hydrant again. This time, there was a parking ticket under his windshield wiper. I felt a little satisfied. Later that day, my husband texted me from the front yard. He said the truck owner had come back, seen the ticket, torn it up, and thrown the pieces on our lawn. The man had flipped off our house before driving away. I texted back asking if he was serious. My husband said yes and told me he'd taken a photo of the license plate. That evening, we talked about reporting him for littering, but decided to wait and see if he'd learn his lesson. Week 3. Sweet Justice. Saturday came again. From our living room window, I watched the truck pull up to the hydrant. The driver went straight for his spot as if he owned it. I rolled my eyes and tried not to think about him. A few hours later, I heard angry shouting from our front yard. I looked out the window to see what was happening. There he was, waving his arms at his truck, which now had a large yellow boot on its front wheel. A parking officer stood nearby writing another ticket. I stepped outside to watch. The man was yelling that they couldn't do this to him when he was just watching his kid play baseball. The parking officer told him it was clearly marked as a no parking zone because of the fire hydrant. When the man said it was just for a couple of hours, the officer explained that emergency services wouldn't be able to use the hydrant in case of a fire. The officer also said their record showed he'd already gotten a warning and a ticket at this location. The man said he never got a ticket, which is when I spoke up. I told him he had gotten a ticket last week, which he had torn up and thrown on my lawn before flipping off my house. His face turned red. He said I had called the authorities on him. I told him I hadn't needed to, since parking officers regularly check the area on game days. The officer then listed all the fines: $150 for boot removal, $75 for parking at a hydrant, plus $95 for the unpaid ticket from last week with late fees. The man said this was highway robbery. The officer told him he could fight the tickets in court if he thought they were unfair, and gave him a packet with payment and boot removal instructions before walking away. The man stood there looking at his booted truck, the hydrant, and me. I told him the visitor parking area had always been just around the corner, then went inside. Through the window, I watched him make several phone calls before someone picked him up, leaving his truck behind. It stayed there until Monday morning when he finally paid to have it removed. I wonder what week 4 will bring. Maybe he'll learn to park somewhere else, or maybe the city will tow him next time. Either way, I'll be watching from my window. I moved out of my parents' house over a year ago. Having my own space felt like breathing after being underwater. I spent years dealing with family drama, random emergencies where I had to drop everything, and being the responsible one while others made messes. My apartment is a small one-bedroom with mismatched furniture, but it's mine. I pay my bills, keep my hours, and feel peace. I work 2 jobs to make ends meet, at an office and a local cafe on weekends. It's tiring, but worth it for independence. Then the phone call started. My mom called about my cousin. I tensed up. My cousin and I grew up together and were once close, but her substance abuse problems got worse. She stole money, disappeared for days, and caused scenes. I tried to help her many times, but nothing worked. I asked what about her. Mom told me my cousin was having a rough time, lost her job, and got evicted. I knew where this was heading. Mom suggested I take in my cousin since I had space in my apartment. I told her I lived in a 1-bedroom with no extra space. She said my living room was big enough for a futon and my cousin just needed somewhere to stay for a while. She reminded me how close we were growing up. She forgot we hadn't spoken in months after she borrowed my credit card at a family gathering and charged items at the liquor store. I said sorry about my cousin's struggles but told her I couldn't take her in. I reminded her about my cousin's problems and that I couldn't handle them. Mom said she was family and trying this time, saying she needed support. I asked why she and Dad couldn't take her in since they had a spare bedroom. There was silence. She made excuses about Dad's blood pressure and how he couldn't handle stress. She said they already raised their children. They didn't want to deal with it, so I should. I said no again. The next day, my phone filled with messages from family members. My parents told everyone I was refusing to help family in need. My aunt called crying, saying her daughter needed a stable environment, and I was the only one she looked up to. My father was more direct. He said I was selfish and he didn't raise me that way. He said family takes care of family. I told him I was worried about my cousin but couldn't help. I worked long hours, barely supported myself, and didn't want to come home afraid of what I might find. Dad asked if we were abandoning her to the street. I suggested programs and professionals could help her. I wasn't qualified. He dismissed this, saying she needed family, not strangers. This went on for days. They kept saying I was selfish, didn't understand family loyalty, and was abandoning someone who needed me. Then came family dinner. My parents insisted I come over. When I arrived, my cousin was at the table looking thin and fidgety. Mom pointed out my cousin had stopped by and we should catch up. My cousin barely looked at me when she greeted me. I asked how she was doing. She said she'd been better and lost her place. Mom jumped in, saying my cousin should stay with me for a while. She called my apartment cute and said I was doing well on my own. I felt ambushed. My cousin looked uncomfortable too. She knew about this plan. I told my mom we already discussed this and I couldn't take my cousin in. Mom asked if I couldn't or wouldn't. Dad said I was turning my back on my cousin when she needed help. I took a breath and said I wasn't turning my back on anyone. I needed them to respect my decision. My apartment was my space, and I decided who lived there. My aunt mentioned everything the family had done for me, saying they were always there for me. Something snapped inside me. I asked when they were actually there for me. No one helped when I was saving to move out. I worked double shifts for months. When I needed a co-signer for my lease because my credit wasn't established, my boss helped, not family. For years I was told to be responsible while everyone else got bailed out. The table went silent. I said I cared about my cousin but couldn't set myself on fire to keep someone else warm. I worked too hard for my peace. My cousin looked up and said it was okay, she didn't want to impose. She said my parents were pushing the idea. I offered to help her find resources and programs that could address what she was going through. I said I couldn't be her housing solution but would support her in other ways. My parents were angry but I didn't budge. I took out my phone and showed information on local recovery programs. I offered to drive my cousin to an appointment if she wanted. She agreed. She said maybe it was time to try something different, since nothing else worked. I left dinner with my boundaries intact. My parents didn't speak to me for 2 weeks, but they came around when my cousin stuck with the program and improved. She thanked me later for not enabling her like everyone else. I don't regret standing my ground. My peace was hard-earned. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.